The nanny survived more than a week with Damien Voss's wild, grieving twins, until a woman walked in, looked them in the eyes, and said something that made them freeze. What she carried in her past would either heal this broken family or shatter it forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Damien Voss stood in the sunlit hallway of his sprawling glass and stone estate, watching the front door slam so hard the sound echoed against the marble walls. A burst of sharp, frustrated muttering followed as the latest nanny, a young woman whose name he barely had time to remember, stomped down the steps, her once polished bun now a frizzy halo of defeat. Her sweater was smeared with what looked suspiciously like chocolate pudding, and one of her shoes was missing. She didn't even bother to look back as she yanked open the gate and stormed toward the waiting rideshare. Damien sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. It was the fourth nanny in as many weeks. The twins, Max and Mia, had a reputation, one that was growing faster than his own tech empire. From somewhere upstairs, a peal of laughter rang out, sharp, mischievous, and utterly unrepentant. Damien didn't need to guess which child it belonged to. Max's laugh had that particular note of triumph, as though he'd just completed a daring mission. If Max was laughing, Mia was involved too. The two were partners in crime, each feeding off the other's boundless energy and knack for chaos. Damien's shoes clicked on the polished wood floors as he crossed the hallway. "Max! Mia!" He called up the grand staircase, his voice carrying the mix of command and exhaustion that had become second nature. A small head of messy blonde hair peeked over the banister. Max grinned down at him, his green eyes flashing with mischief. "She didn't even make it past breakfast," he announced proudly. Beside him, Mia appeared, her wild brown curls pulled into two uneven pigtails. She looked less triumphant than her brother, but there was still a spark in her gaze. "She didn't like my magic trick," Mia said, her tone almost innocent. Damien's brows drew together. "Magic trick?" Mia tilted her head. "The one where you hide scrambled eggs in someone's shoes." He closed his eyes briefly. Max jumped in, unable to contain himself. "You should have seen her face when she put them on." He doubled over laughing, gripping the railing for balance. Damien opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when he admired their cleverness, their creativity, but admiration did little to solve the problem. The twins needed stability, and the revolving door of nannies wasn't giving it to them. They weren't bad kids, at least he didn't think so. They were smart, too smart for their age, and hurting in ways that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to. Losing their mother 3 years ago had left a hole Damien couldn't fill. No matter how many therapy sessions or weekend trips he arranged, he thought nannies could bridge the gap, give them the attention he couldn't while running Voss Technologies. But one by one, they'd quit. Some lasted days, some hours. He'd started to notice a pattern. The more the nannies tried to control the twins, the harder the twins. By the time he retreated to his office, his phone was already buzzing with messages from his assistant, a short list of emergency replacements. He scrolled through the names, none of which sparked any confidence. At Mrs. Toot, one message stood out. "Damien, I spoke with your father's friend Margaret. She recommended someone, Elena Brooks, experienced, unconventional, but gets results. She's local. I told her to come by today for an interview." Damien arched a brow. His father's friends had a mixed track record in helpful recommendations, but he was too tired to argue. Hours later, he was in the formal sitting room, the twins playing suspiciously quiet in the den, when the front door opened and his housekeeper showed in a woman who looked nothing like the nannies before her. Elena Brooks was in her early 30s, her warm brown hair pulled back in a low ponytail, her clothes practical but neatly pressed. She carried herself with a calm confidence, her hazel eyes scanning the room as though assessing not just the space but the mood within it. Damien rose to greet her, offering a hand. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming on such short notice." She shook his hand firmly. "Elena, and from what I hear, You don't have the luxury of notice. The corner of his mouth twitched. You've been briefed, then? Brief enough to know your twins are bright, creative, and spirited, she said, a subtle smile playing on her lips. And that you've been through more childcare staff than most people go through cost. He raised a brow at her candor. That's one way to put it. They sat across from each other, the afternoon light spilling across the sleek lines of the furniture. Damien gave his usual rundown of expectations schedule, educational activities, light discipline when necessary. Elena listened without interrupting, but her expression didn't shift much. When he finished, she leaned forward slightly. That all sounds reasonable, but I should tell you something up front. I'm not here to control them. Damien blinked. You're not. I'm here to listen, she said simply. From everything I've read and heard, these kids don't have a discipline problem. They have a trust problem. I can't make them follow me if they think I'm just another adult waiting to give up on them. Her words landed heavier than he expected. For a moment, Damien didn't speak, his mind flicking back to the laughter from upstairs, the defiance, the walls they'd built. Before he could reply, the twins appeared in the doorway, drawn by curiosity. Max leaned on the frame, studying Elena like a scientist observing a new specimen. Mia hung back slightly, clutching a small stuffed rabbit. Are you the new one? Max asked bluntly. Elena turned her gaze to him without missing a beat. I might be. Are you the ones who put scrambled eggs in people's shoes? Mia's eyes widened and Max's jaw dropped. No adult had ever started like that, without a lecture, without pretending not to know. It was her idea, Max said quickly, pointing at his sister. Hey, Mia protested. Elena smiled, faintly. Good to know. Now I'll know to check my shoes in the morning. She stood, walking toward them at an easy pace, not too fast, not too slow. I'm Elena, and I'm not here to make you be quiet or sit still all day. Max narrowed his eyes. Then what are you here for? Find out what makes you laugh that doesn't involve eggs, she said. The twins exchanged a look, one of those silent sibling conversations that spoke volumes. Damien watched, something in his chest shifting. For the first time in a long while, the air in the room didn't feel tense. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he had a feeling Elena Brooks might just be the one to stay. Damien remained standing by the mantel as Elena crouched slightly, putting herself at the twins' eye level. She didn't lean in too close, didn't plaster on a fake smile. She simply met their gazes as though she had all the time in the world to hear whatever they might say. Mia shifted her weight from one foot to the other, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Most nannies don't ask what makes us laugh, she murmured, almost like she was testing the waters. Then most nannies are missing the fun part, Elena replied, her tone soft but sure. Because once you figure that out, the rest comes easier. She tilted her head slightly. You two don't like strangers much, do you? Max's eyes narrowed. Strangers don't stay. The words were so blunt, so unflinching, that Damien's chest tightened. It was the truth, stripped bare by a 7-year-old. Elena nodded, slowly, as though he'd given her the most important piece of the puzzle. I get that. My job isn't to stick around just until it gets hard. My job is to stick. Max blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. Damien cleared his throat, needing to step in before his emotions betrayed him. Elena, this isn't an easy position. The twins can be inventive. She glanced at him briefly, one eyebrow raised. Inventive sounds like a good thing. Depends how you work with it. You'll need patience, Damien said, and resilience. Sleaton replied, straightening up. But here's what I'll need from you, Mr. Voss, no undercutting me in front of them. If I'm going to earn their trust, they have to believe you and I are on the same page. It was the kind of request that could easily sound like a demand, but her voice held no arrogance, only certainty. Damien found himself nodding before he even thought about it. The twins watched this exchange like it was a chess match. Mia tilted her head, finally stepping forward to stand beside her brother. What happens if we don't like you? She asked. Elena smiled, not sweetly but honestly. Then I'll keep showing up until you do. A flicker of something, interest, maybe even a thread of hope, passed across Mia's face before she masked it again. Max looked skeptical, but he didn't challenge her further. Damien motioned toward the adjoining den. "Why don't you spend a little time with them now, see how it goes?" Elena nodded and turned toward the den, but she didn't direct the twins to follow her. Instead, she started looking around the room, her eyes landing on a low shelf stacked with board games. "Do either of you know how to play checkers?" she asked casually. Max frowned. "We're good at chess." "Then you'll destroy me at checkers," Elena said, pulling the box from the shelf. She set it on the coffee table and sat cross-legged on the rug, opening it without fanfare. Damien stayed in the doorway, watching. For a moment, the twins just stood there, clearly weighing whether this was worth their time. Then Mia shrugged and walked over, plopping down across from Elena. Max hesitated a beat longer, then joined them, muttering something under his breath about proving how bad she is at this game. As the three began to play, Damien saw something he hadn't in months. A quiet rhythm forming. No shouting, no immediate challenge to authority. Just a game and a conversation about the bizarre rules Max was making up on the spot. Half an hour later, he realized he was still standing there, listening to their laughter, and their laughter that wasn't sharp or mocking this time, but warm. Eventually, Elena looked up at him. "They're sharp," she said, as though he didn't already know. "And they're testing me, but not in the way most people think. They're testing whether I'll still smile if I lose." Damien almost smiled himself. "And will you?" "We already have," she said simply. The rest of the afternoon passed with a strange ease. When the housekeeper brought in snacks, Elena let the twins choose what to eat, but insisted they clear their plates afterward. She didn't raise her voice when Max tried to sneak extra cookies. She just told him she was saving them for after they played outside. By the time dinner rolled around, Damien had seen enough to know she was different. The twins didn't retreat to their rooms after eating. They lingered at the table, asking Elena questions about where she'd grown up, if she had pets, what her favorite ice cream flavor was. After the twins went upstairs to get ready for bed, Damien walked Elena to the front door. The air between them was calmer than it had been that morning. "You handled them well," he admitted. "I handled them," she corrected gently. "I talked to them. Big difference." He studied her for a moment. "So, will you take the job?" Her expression didn't waver. "I already have. See you in the morning." With that, she stepped out into the cool evening, leaving Damien standing there with the faintest, most reluctant trace of relief in his chest. Upstairs, behind two closed bedroom doors, Max and Mia were still whispering to each other, and though he couldn't hear their words, he had a feeling they weren't plotting how to scare this one away. The morning light was barely slipping through the wide glass windows of the Voss estate when Elena stepped into the kitchen. She had been up since before dawn, dressed neatly in a soft cream sweater and dark jeans, her hair tied back in a low ponytail. A fresh mug of coffee steamed in her hand, though she had yet to take a sip. It was her first full day on the job, and she wanted to be ready for anything. She just hadn't expected anything to start with a loud crash and a startled yelp from somewhere nearby. She set her coffee down and hurried toward the sound, finding herself in the kitchen doorway and in the middle of a disaster. A can of blue paint, the kind Damien had left on the counter for a repair project, lay tipped over across the marble island. A river of thick, bright color was already dripping down the sides, puddling onto the pristine white floor. Standing over it, holding what looked like a paintbrush fashioned from tied-together spoons, was Mia. She froze mid-stir, her eyes wide but not guilty, more like she'd been caught mid-science experiment. "Good morning," Elena said, her voice calm as she took in the scene. "That's a bold color choice for breakfast." Before Mia could respond, a sudden croak echoed from the hallway behind them. Elena turned just in time to see a small green frog hopping past the kitchen door, followed closely by Max, who instead of walking was perched halfway up the built-in bookshelf in the hall, his bare feet clinging to the wood as if he were scaling a tree. He glanced over his shoulder and grinned. "It's for the fort," he called out, as if that explained everything. Elena's eyes shifted between the dripping paint, the hopping frog, and the 7-year-olds halfway to the ceiling. For a moment, she could almost hear the voices of all the nannies who had quit before her. How they would have shouted, demanded, or thrown up their hands in defeat. But Elena didn't move toward the mess. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she walked into the kitchen, crouched down so she was level with Mia, and asked softly, "Tell me what you were trying to make." Mia blinked. "It's not a mess, it's the ocean." Elena tilted her head. "For the fort," Mia explained, glancing toward her brother. "If the floor's the ocean, you have to stay in the fort or you'll drown. Max was building the top lookout." Elena let the explanation settle in. "So, you weren't just making a mess, you were making a game." Mia gave a small nod, the defensive set of her shoulders easing a little. From the hallway, Max added, "And the frog is the sea monster." Elena straightened and stepped into the hall. She looked up at Max, who was grinning like he'd just outsmarted her. "And what happens if the sea monster escapes into Mr. Voss's office?" Max hesitated, then shrugged. "Then, I guess the fort sinks." "Or," Elena said evenly, "you could be the sea monster's trainer and keep it safe. Sea monsters need care too, you know." His expression shifted, just slightly, but it was enough to tell her he was listening. She extended a hand toward him. "Let's get the frog somewhere it can be happy without scaring anyone, and then we'll see if we can save your ocean before it floods the whole kitchen." He eyed her for a long moment before slowly climbing down. Together, they guided the frog into a small plastic container Elena found under the sink. Mia followed, holding a towel that was quickly turning streaked with blue paint. Instead of ordering them to clean everything immediately, Elena led them into the breakfast nook and pulled out 3 chairs. "Before we tackle the ocean, I want to hear something from both of you." Max slumped into a chair, still clutching the frog's container. "We were just playing." "No," Elena said, "and I think it's creative. But can I ask, do you do this kind of thing because you think no one's paying attention?" The twins exchanged a glance, but didn't answer right away. "Because here's the thing," she continued. "I'm not here to stop you from playing. I'm here to make sure you can play in a way that doesn't make Mr. Voss hire a construction crew afterward." That earned the smallest of smirks from Max, and Mia's eyes dropped to her lap. Elena said, leaning forward. "How about this? Every morning, before we start the day, we have a morning council. We plan what games or projects we want to do, and we figure out how to make them happen without flooding the kitchen." Mia tilted her head. "Like a meeting?" "Exactly," Elena replied. "A meeting where your ideas matter. You tell me what you want, and I help make it happen. Deal?" Max squinted at her. "And if we don't want to do anything you say?" "Then you'll still come to the meeting," Elena said, not missing a beat. "Because I'll have ideas too." It was clear they were processing this in their own way. But neither of them said no. From the doorway, Damien had been standing silently, watching. His arms were folded, and though his face was neutral, there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He had seen tantrums, meltdowns, and outright chaos in this house. He had never seen someone turn a spilled can of paint into a morning strategy session. And as he watched Mia finally smile, just a hint, quick and shy, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, Elena Brooks had found the first crack in the walls his children had built around themselves. The morning council began less than 15 minutes later, gathered around the kitchen table that still smelled faintly of cleaning solution. The ocean was gone, the marble counters wiped clean, but a faint shadow of blue lingered on Mia's socks and along Max's forearm. Elena didn't mind. It was proof they'd created something together, even if it hadn't gone exactly as planned. She set out a plate of toast and cut up fruit, sliding it toward them without ceremony. "Council members need fuel," she said. Mia reached for a strawberry, chewing slowly as she watched Elena with the careful gaze of a child who had learned to measure every adult's patience. Max, on the other hand, popped a piece of toast into his mouth and mumbled, "So, what's first?" "You tell me," Elena replied, pulling out a small notepad and pen. "What's on your agenda for today?" Mia's brow furrowed. "Agenda?" means what you want to do, Elena explained. Games, projects, adventures, whatever you think will make today worth remembering. Max sat up a little. We could build the fort for real this time. Not in the kitchen, outside in the garden. Attached to start, Elena said, jotting it down. What about you, Mia? Mia hesitated, then spoke so softly Elena almost didn't hear. I want to make the fort have stories, like, if it's a ship, there should be a logbook, with drawings. Elena's pen moved again. Excellent. We'll need paper, markers, maybe even a map. Mia's eyes lit up just a fraction before she remembered to look cautious again. From the doorway, Damien cleared his throat. I don't suppose the agenda includes schoolwork. His tone was even, but there was a layer of skepticism under it. Elena looked over her shoulder at him. We can make that part of the council, she said. Math for measuring fort walls, reading for the ship's log, science for frog care. Max grinned. Frog care is important. Slowly, he turned. A large slip was made. A lip twitched upward. He stepped back, leaving them to it. By mid-morning, the fort-building project was in full swing. The twins dragged out blankets, cushions, and a small folding table from the garage. Elena didn't direct them so much as she joined in, holding one side of a blanket while Max tied the other to a low tree branch, showing Mia how to weigh down the corners with stones so the wind wouldn't tear it away. It was messy, a little chaotic, but the difference from earlier was striking. There were no tantrums, no sudden disappearances down hallways. The twins were talking to her and to each other in bursts of genuine collaboration. When Max climbed halfway up the tree to tie the crow's nest flag, Elena steadied the ladder and said, You know, you're braver than most pirates. He smirked. Pirates? Don't get scared. Oh, they do, she said, but they climb anyway. A faint blush touched his cheeks before he scrambled down. Tia was on the blanket floor, carefully arranging a notebook and colored pencils. Can you help me draw the sea monster? She asked, without looking up. Elena knelt beside her. Tell me what it looks like. As Mia described it, long tail, tiny wings, eyes that could change color depending on its mood. Elena sketched slowly, letting Mia guide the shape. The girl's voice grew more animated with each detail, until she was leaning close, adding her own lines and giggling at the crooked teeth they drew together. From the patio, Damien watched with a faintly puzzled expression. He had seen nannies who tried discipline, rewards, punishments, bribes. He had never seen one who simply sat down and listened until his children leaned toward her instead of away. By lunchtime, the fort was standing strong, its ocean a patch of bright blue fabric spread across the grass. The frogs, temporarily renamed Captain Bubbles, sat safely in a shaded corner, occasionally croaking as if approving the work. Elena called the council to order once more, this time inside at the dining table, where she served grilled cheese sandwiches alongside apple slices. Council report, she said, pretending to adjust imaginary glasses. What worked today? Max smirked. We didn't flood the kitchen. That's progress, Elena agreed. And what can we do tomorrow? Mia hesitated, glancing briefly at her brother. Maybe we could invite Dad to see the fort? Damien, who had just stepped into the room with a file in hand, froze. Max frowned. He's always busy. Always, Elena said gently. Sometimes people just need to be asked. The twins turned toward their father. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Damien cleared his throat. If the fort's still standing after dinner, I'll come see it. Mia's smile was small but genuine. Max just shrugged, though there was no mistaking the flicker of pride in his eyes. After lunch, they returned to the garden, adding small defenses to the fort and decorating the walls with chalk drawings. Elena didn't push them to hurry or follow strict rules. She simply kept the energy moving forward, stepping in only when a disagreement threatened to unravel the whole project. By the time shadows began to stretch long across the grass, the fort was complete. 2 chairs sat inside for captains, the logbook had its first 2 entries, and the frog's corner was shaded by a small scrap of cloth, hung like a sail. Dinner passed with surprisingly few interruptions. Mia asked her father about his favorite color for ship sails. Max wanted to know if billionaires ever fought sea monsters. Damien answered both questions without rolling his eyes once. When they stepped outside afterward, the twins ran ahead to the garden, calling, "Come on, Dad!" Damien followed, his polished shoes crunching softly on the gravel. He ducked inside the fort, looking around at the makeshift walls, the chalk-covered ocean, and the carefully guarded frog corner. He paused, clearly searching for the right word. "Functional," Max offered. "Impressive," Damien said finally, meeting Elena's eyes over the twins' heads. Her smile was small but steady. "Morning Council will meet again tomorrow. You're welcome to attend." He gave a quiet huff of amusement but didn't say no. That night, as Elena gathered the scattered pencils and folded a spare blanket, she caught sight of the twins standing in the doorway of their rooms, watching her. "Good night, Captain Max." "Good night, Captain Mia," she said softly. Mia whispered something to her brother before they both smiled, mischievous, wary, but no longer entirely closed off. It wasn't surrender, but it wasn't resistance either. And for a first challenge, that felt like a victory. The rain had been falling since morning, turning the glass walls of the Voss estate into muted panels of gray and silver. Outside, the gardens blurred into soft shadows, and the sound of steady drops on the roof created a hush over the usually lively rooms. The twins had been restless all morning, but after lunch, Elena realized she hadn't heard Max's voice in over 20 minutes. For a boy whose energy usually filled every corner, the silence was startling. She checked the playroom. Empty. His bedroom bed unmade, toy cars scattered across the rug, but no Max. It wasn't until she noticed a faint creak from above that she guessed where he might be. The attic ladder was already lowered when she reached the end of the hallway. She climbed slowly, careful not to startle him. The space smelled faintly of cedar and old books, lit only by a small round window that cast a pale glow over the dust-speckled air. Max was sitting cross-legged near a stack of unopened boxes, a pencil in his hand. Before him lay a sheet of paper, the lines of a woman's face emerging in careful strokes. Sharp cheekbones, gentle eyes, hair falling in soft waves. Elena paused, her heart squeezing. She recognized the face, though she had only seen it in framed photographs around the house. Damien's late wife, Isabel. Max didn't look up when he spoke. "I can't remember her laugh anymore." His voice was quiet, almost lost in the patter of rain. Elena crossed the room and lowered herself to the floor beside him, her legs folding silently. She didn't ask questions or rush to fill the space. She simply sat there, letting the sound of the rain be their only conversation for a few minutes. Finally, Max's pencil slowed. "Sometimes I think I'm making her up, like, I remember her reading to us, but maybe I'm just remembering the pictures in the book." "You're not making her up," Elena said softly. "Memories change shape over time, but they're still yours." Max stared at the drawing, his jaw tight. "Dad doesn't talk about her much," Truly said. To Kate, her amazement, sometimes talking is harder than remembering. The creak of the ladder made them both turn. Mia stood halfway up, her small hands gripping the side rails. She climbed the rest of the way and crossed to them without a word, sinking onto the floor next to her brother. "Heard you," she said to Max. "I can't remember her voice either. Sometimes I think I'm forgetting her face too." Max's hand clenched around the pencil. "That's why I'm drawing her, so I don't forget." Mia leaned closer to the paper, her eyes tracing the half-finished lines. Her hair was softer, she whispered, and her smile was bigger, like when she saw us run in from the garden all muddy. Max hesitated, then adjusted the curve of the mouth. "Better?" Mia nodded, a small smile flickering across her lips before fading again. Elena let the quiet settle between them for a moment before speaking. "What if you didn't have to remember her alone?" They both looked at her. "Quantical. Do you mean?" Max asked. "Bean. What if we made a place just for her, somewhere in the house where her pictures and stories could live? A place you could visit anytime you wanted." Mia tilted her head. "Like a shrine?" "More like a memory wall," Elena said. We could fill it with photos, drawings, things she loved, and stories. Yours, your dad's, even from people who knew her before you were born. Max frowned slightly. Where would it go? The playroom, Elena suggested. It's your space, and it's where you feel most like yourselves. We could make one whole wall hers. The twins exchanged a look of one of those wordless conversations siblings have, the kind built on years of shared glances. Mia's voice was barely above a whisper. Can we put the sunflower picture there, the one from the garden? Elena said without hesitation. Max tapped the pencil against the floor. And the story Dad told once, about the time she burned dinner because she was dancing in the kitchen? Elena smiled. Definitely that story. They sat there for a while longer, talking quietly about the things they remembered. The smell of her perfume, the way she sang while brushing Mia's hair, the silly nicknames she made up for Max's stuffed animals. Some memories were clear, others fuzzy around the edges, but each one seemed to make the attic warmer. When the rain softened, Elena suggested they go downstairs and start sorting through the photos in the living room cabinet. Max carefully set the drawing aside, as if afraid it might vanish if he wasn't gentle. Leah took his hand as they climbed down, their steps almost in sync. In the living room, Elena pulled open the wide drawer beneath the bookshelves. Stacks of photo albums lay inside, along with loose prints in faded envelopes. The twins settled on the rug, pulling the albums toward them like treasure chests. They laughed at some pictures, baby baths in the kitchen sink, muddy faces in the garden, Halloween costumes that didn't quite fit. And when they found the sunflower picture, both fell quiet for a moment, their smiles soft. Damien found them there half an hour later. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the sight of his children bent over the albums, Elena sitting cross-legged between them, something in his chest tightened. "What's going on?" he asked carefully. Mia looked up first. "We're making a memory wall. For Mom?" Damien's gaze flickered to Elena, a question in his eyes. She answered quietly, "They want a place where they can see her every day, somewhere the memories won't fade." He didn't respond right away. His expression was guarded but not cold, more like someone who'd just stumbled into a room he hadn't opened in years. "And where will this wall be?" "The playroom," Max said, "so we can see it all the time." Damien's eyes dropped to the sunflower photo lying on the rug. His hand tightened slightly around the folder he was holding. "We'll talk about it later." He turned and walked toward his study, but not before Elena caught the smallest flicker of something, fear, maybe, or the ache of a memory too sharp to touch. Elena didn't press Damien that afternoon. She'd learned in her first week here that the man guarded his emotions like a fortress. Stone walls, high gates, no uninvited guests. Pushing too hard would only make him retreat further. Instead, she turned back to the twins, smiling softly. "All right," she said. "Let's choose our first pictures. We'll make a list of the stories to go with them." Max and Mia dove back into the albums. They picked the sunflower picture first, then one of their mother in a wide-brimmed hat at the beach, holding both of them in her arms. Mia traced her tiny infant self in the photo and whispered, "She looked so happy." "It was," Elena said, "and she would be proud you're remembering her this way." For the next hour, they worked together, building a small stack of photos and jotting down moments they wanted to capture. Elena wrote their words exactly as they said them, preserving their voices. By the time they'd gathered 8 photos, the twins were calmer than she'd seen them in days. No fidgeting, no sudden bursts of mischief, just quiet focus. When Damien joined them for dinner that evening, the stack of photos was still on the counter. He glanced at it, but didn't comment, instead asking about their day. The twins looked at each other before Mia blurted, "We're starting tomorrow." Damien paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Starting what?" "Memory wall," Max said, more firmly than before. "It's happening." Damien's jaw tightened. "We'll discuss it later." Elena could feel the disappointment ripple through the twins, but she didn't intervene. This wasn't a battle to be fought over dinner. Instead, she changed the subject, drawing them into a conversation about what games they wanted to play after they finished eating. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Elena stood in the playroom, imagining where the memory wall could go. The far side of the room, opposite the windows, was perfect, wide enough for photos, drawings, maybe even shelves for small keepsakes. She pictured the twins bringing friends here one day, pointing to the wall with pride instead of sadness. She didn't hear Damien approach until his voice broke the silence. "You think this will help them?" She turned to see him in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, eyes shadowed. "I do," she said. "They need a place where remembering doesn't hurt as much, where it feels safe." His gaze flicked to the blank wall. "I've avoided filling that space for a reason." "Because it hurts," Elena said quietly. Damien didn't deny it. "Every time I see her face, it's like losing her again. Every time they forget a detail, it's like losing her for them," Elena replied. "You're trying to protect yourself from pain, Damien. But they need your permission to remember." For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the distant hum of the rain gutters. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "If we do this, it has to be done right." Elena nodded. "Then let's do it together." The next morning, the twins woke to find Damien already in the playroom measuring the wall. Max blinked in surprise. "You're helping?" "Looks like it," Damien said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Mia practically bounced in place. "We can start today," Damien replied, "but we're going to do it properly. Frames, not tape. Labels for each photo. Stories written so we remember exactly how they happened." The twins exchanged a quick, almost disbelieving look before rushing to get their photos. For the rest of the morning, the four of them worked together. Damien unpacked tools from the garage, showing Max how to measure evenly spaced hooks. Mia polished each frame until the glass shone. Elena stood back now and then, watching the way Damien bent to listen when Max explained a story, or how he nodded when Mia suggested adding one of her mother's scarves to the display. By midday, the first row of photos was up. The sunflower picture went in the center, its golden petals bright against the pale wall. Below it, Damien wrote in neat block letters, "Summer in the Garden, 2016. Isabel laughed until she cried. Mia touched the glass gently. "It's perfect." Max stood back, tilting his head. "It's like she's here." Damien's throat tightened, but he didn't look away from the photo. "She'd like this," he said softly. They broke for lunch, the mood lighter than it had been in weeks. The twins chattered about which photos to add next, their excitement spilling over in quick bursts. Even Damien seemed less guarded, his voice warmer as he asked Elena about her own family. That afternoon, as they hung the last frame for the day, Max pointed to the empty space still left on the wall. "We're not done," he said. Elena agreed. "This wall will grow, just like your memories will." Damien looked at her, something unspoken passing between them, a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't just about the twins anymore. It was about all of them, finding a way to live with the past without letting it define the future. When the twins finally went to bed, the playroom felt different. Warmer, lived in. As Elena turned off the lights, she glanced once more at the sunflower photo. The petals seemed to glow faintly in the dark, a promise that the wall and the love behind it would remain. It happened in the space of a heartbeat. One moment, Elena was in the kitchen, arranging fresh fruit on a tray for the twins' snack. The next, she heard a crash and a burst of laughter echoing down the grand hallway. Her instincts sent her running. She rounded the corner just in time to see it, Max and Mia gripping the edges of a mattress as it rocketed down the sweeping grand staircase. Their faces were alight with wild exhilaration, hair flying, the mattress bumping dangerously over the last step before slamming into the polished floor with a dull thud. Her breath caught. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice sharp enough to halt their laughter mid-echo. Max's grin faltered. Mia's eyes widened, sensing trouble. But neither of them looked sorry, only sorry with the thrill of what they'd just done. "Upstairs. Now," Elena said firmly, her heart still racing from the image of what could have gone wrong. A tumble, a head injury, too many terrible possibilities. She followed them up the steps, the mattress. In their room, she closed the door and faced them. "Do you understand what could have happened? You could have broken bones?" Worse, just having fun, Max mumbled, crossing his arms. Fun is fine, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the heat in her chest. But not when it risks your safety. You matter too much to throw yourselves down a staircase. Mia shifted uncomfortably. No one ever lets us do anything exciting. Elena paused, hearing the thread beneath the words. Not defiance, but frustration. This wasn't just about a mattress and a staircase. It was about the energy bottled up in them, searching for an outlet. She took a slow breath. All right, if you want exciting, we'll find a way to do it safely. Deal? Both twins blinked at her, thrown off by the lack of a lecture or punishment. What do you mean? Max asked, suspicious. Leah said. We'll build something that gives you the rush without the risk. Outside. This afternoon. By the time Damien came home for lunch, the backyard was alive with activity. Elena had pulled out large cushions, sturdy planks, ropes, and old tires from the garage. With the twins' input, they'd begun assembling an obstacle course that wound across the grass, low jumps, rope crawls, a tire tunnel, and a gentle slide made from a sheet of plywood anchored safely at the base. What's all this? Damien asked, stepping onto the patio. Lucian, Elena replied, wiping her hands on her jeans. They needed a thrill. Now they have one. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. After what they did this morning? Elena said simply, and before you say it, I'm not excusing it, but if they keep that kind of energy bottled up, it'll come out in dangerous ways. This way, we set boundaries and give them freedom inside those boundaries. Damien crossed his arms. Sounds like indulging bad behavior. Redirecting it, Elena countered, meeting his gaze. Boundaries stick when they feel like trust, not a cage. The twins, oblivious to the undertones in their conversation, whooped with excitement as they tested the course. Max zipped through the tire tunnel, rolling out the other side with a triumphant yell. Mia balanced carefully on a low beam before hopping to the grass. Elena gestured toward them. Tell me they look like kids plotting their next dangerous stunt. Damien hesitated. The laughter was loud, but it wasn't reckless. The course was sturdy, safe. Still, his jaw tightened. You're playing a long game. I hope it works. That afternoon, Elena timed them on the course, adding little challenges, carrying a beanbag while climbing the rope, crawling backward through the tunnel. The twins' competitive streak kicked in, and soon they were breathless with laughter, daring each other to improve their times. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm streaks of gold, Elena called for a break. The twins flopped onto the grass, grinning and sweaty. It was the best day ever, Mia declared, spreading her arms wide. Better than the staircase? Elena asked. Max smirked. Maybe. Inside, Elena kept their evening calm, scattered a bit of drawing, then a quiet stretch in the living room. She noticed something different in their energy, less twitchy, more settled. After dinner, she followed them upstairs. Max stopped at the top step and glanced back. Will you read to us? Elena froze for a second, surprised. She'd learned from Damien that they hadn't asked anyone to read to them in months, not since their last nanny quit abruptly. Of course, she said. They piled onto Max's bed, Mia curling against her brother's side. Elena chose a worn copy of The Secret Garden, its spine creased with age. Her voice softened as she read, letting the rhythm of the story fill the room. Halfway through, she noticed Damien leaning in the doorway, silent. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't leave. When she closed the book, the twins were already drifting toward sleep. She pulled the blanket over them gently. As she stepped into the hall, Damien spoke quietly. You have more patience than I thought possible. It's not patience, she said. It's remembering they're kids, not problems to solve. His gaze held hers for a moment longer before he nodded, almost reluctantly. Elena lingered in the hallway for a moment after Damien's words, letting the quiet sink in. The house felt unusually still. No footsteps pounding, no muffled giggles from behind doors. It was the kind of peace she suspected didn't come often in this home. She descended the staircase slowly, the soft runner muffling her steps. In the kitchen, she set about tidying the dishes from dinner, her thoughts circling back to Damien's hesitation earlier in the day. He had seen the course in the backyard, had seen the twins' joy, but part of him was still waiting for her to fail like the others before her. She couldn't blame him. If she had lived through a cycle of hiring and losing caretakers for her children, she might have been just as guarded. The faintest creak pulled her attention toward the living room. Damien was there, standing near the large windows, the glow of the nightlights from the garden casting shadows across his face. His posture was thoughtful, one hand in his pocket, the other absently tapping against his leg. "Flynn," she asked softly. He nodded. "Quicker than I expected. You must have worn them out." "Me," she said with a small smile. "They wore themselves out. That's the difference." He looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. "You really believe this will last? That this calm would vanish in a few days?" It can," she said, "but only if they trust it's not temporary." Damien's gaze shifted to the window again. "They've been disappointed too many times. I don't want them thinking this is permanent." Elena stepped closer, her tone steady but warm. "Children can feel when someone's just waiting for the end. They can also feel when someone's committed, even if they don't have the words for it." His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. Instead, he glanced toward the hallway. "Mia asked me once if the reason Nanny's left was because of her and Max. I told her no. She didn't believe me." Ayla felt a pang deep in her chest. Then she needs someone who won't leave. And she needs to see proof of that every single day. The weight in the room thickened, but before either could say more, a small voice broke through the quiet. "Lula." It was Max, his hair mussed from the pillow, eyes heavy with sleep. She turned toward the staircase. "What's wrong?" He rubbed his eyes. "I forgot. Can you check under the bed? Just in case." She bit back a smile. "Of course." Damien stepped forward. "I'll go with you." Together, they climbed the stairs, their steps in sync without thinking. In Max's room, Elena crouched to look under the bed. "Nothing here but your socks, Max. And maybe one missing shoe." Max smiled faintly, satisfied. As Elena tucked him back in, Damien stood nearby, his presence quiet but solid. When they stepped out into the hallway again, something in the air between them had shifted. "You didn't have to come," Elena said. "I know," Damien replied, "but I wanted to." They paused there, the sounds of the night settling around them. "Good night, Mr. Voss," she said, her voice low. His eyes lingered on her for a beat too long before he nodded. "Good night, Elena." She returned to her room, closing the door gently behind her. In the quiet, she sat on the edge of the bed, aware that something had changed, not just with the twins, but in the way Damien had looked at her. Respect, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. Down the hall, Damien returned to his study, but his mind wasn't on the files waiting for him. It was on the woman who had walked into his home, faced the chaos without flinching, and somehow left it quieter than she found it. He didn't trust easily, but tonight he found himself wondering if Elena Brooks was the exception. The day Victoria Voss arrived, the estate felt different. Damien's sister had that effect. Her presence was like a sudden cold front, brisk and sharp, sweeping into every corner without invitation. Her car, a polished black sedan, rolled up the drive just after noon, its glossy surface reflecting the late sunlight in blinding flashes. Elena was in the playroom with Max and Mia when she heard the front door open. The twins exchanged looks, and it wasn't the look of excitement a child might have for an aunt. No, this was something closer to dread. "Enter, her brother," Max groaned. "She's going to tell Dad we're too wild again." Elena glanced at them both. "Is she often here?" "Lot," Mia said, "but when she is, she talks like she's in charge of everything." Elena tucked this away. She didn't know Victoria, but she could feel the wariness in the room like static. A moment later, Victoria swept into the doorway, her tailored suit crisp, her hair in a perfect twist, and a look in her eyes that seemed to take inventory of everything and everyone in sight. She said, her gaze moving over Elena. "So, you're the new nanny." Elena rose, offering a polite smile. Elena Brooks. Victoria's handshake was firm, her eyes narrowing just slightly as though weighing her. I've heard about you. You've lasted longer than most. Elena couldn't tell if it was meant as a compliment or a warning. To try to meet people where they are, Elena said. Victoria's smile was tight. Children don't need someone to meet them, they need someone to guide them, to discipline them. Elena chose not to respond to that yet, sensing the conversation would unfold whether she wanted it to or not. Dinner that evening was set in the formal dining room, a space Elena had rarely seen used. The long mahogany table gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, the silverware arranged with precision. Max and Mia were already in their seats when Elena arrived, their posture stiff, eyes wary. Damien stood at the head of the table, greeting his sister with a kiss on the cheek before taking his seat. For the first several minutes, the conversation stayed in safe waters, updates on Damien's company, mentions of mutual acquaintances. But it didn't take long for Victoria to shift the current. I saw the children in the garden earlier, she began, her tone neutral enough to almost sound harmless. They were climbing some sort of structure, an obstacle course? Elena glanced at Damien, who set down his fork slowly. Yes, I built it for them, she said. It's safer than some of the things they try indoors. Victoria's eyebrow arched. Safer? Or just enabling? Max froze mid-bite, his gaze flicking between the adults. Mia's fingers curled into her napkin under the table. Damien's voice carried a warning edge. Victoria? No, Damien, Victoria interrupted. You hire nannies to instill order, not to indulge chaos. If these two are still behaving wildly, then perhaps the methods need adjusting. She turned her eyes directly to Elena. Children need boundaries, not friendship. Elena set her fork down gently, the clink of silver against china barely audible. I agree that children need boundaries. But boundaries hold more meaning when they're built on trust. Victoria tilted her head, as if humoring her. Trust is earned, discipline is immediate. I grew up with both, and it made me stronger. I don't doubt that, Elena replied evenly. But these children have lost their mother. They've lost stability. Discipline without understanding might make them quieter, but it won't make them feel safe. The silence that followed was heavy. Max and Mia were watching her intently now, their shoulders still tense, but their eyes fixed on her like she was an anchor in an unsteady sea. Victoria's voice dropped a fraction, cool but sharp. And what happens when they push you too far? When your patience runs out like it has for every other nanny? Elena met her gaze without flinching. Then I remind myself why I'm here. Not to win every battle, but to make sure they never have to wonder if I care. Damien's eyes shifted to Elena, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. Respect, perhaps? Or recognition? The conversation limped forward after that, with Victoria occasionally circling back to small critiques. A missed sir or ma'am from the twins, a note about posture, but the sharpest blow had already been struck, and Elena had stood her ground. Still, she could feel the tension radiating off Victoria like heat from a summer road. Dinner ended without dessert, and as they rose from the table, Victoria touched Damien's arm, her voice low but not low enough for Elena to miss. She'll leave like all the others, Victoria murmured. Don't let them get attached. Damien didn't answer, but his silence was louder than any defense he could have given. The moment Victoria's words settled in the air, Elena felt a shift, subtle but unmistakable. Damien's jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, but he said nothing. He simply turned away, ushering his sister toward the grand sitting room for coffee. Max and Mia lingered near the dining table, their small figures framed by the tall windows where the last light of evening poured in. Elena stayed behind with them, knowing their unease hadn't vanished with the meal. She doesn't like you, Max blurted after a long pause, his voice carrying a mix of defiance and worry. She doesn't have to, Elena said gently, kneeling so she could meet his eyes. But you do, don't you? Max hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. Ia's voice was even smaller. She always tells Daddy that people leave, that no one stays. Elena reached for their hands, one in each of hers. Then we'll just have to show her she's wrong. For a moment, The tension eased. Max's lips twitched into a brief smile before he masked it again. Mia held on a second longer, as though reluctant to let go. They retreated to the playroom while Elena cleared the last of the plates. She could hear Victoria's voice carrying from the sitting room, low but firm, slicing through the quiet like a knife. Too soft. You've seen this before, Damien. They need discipline, not this. What is it? This understanding she talks about. That's how they end up spoiled. How do you suggest we handle children who've already lost so much? Damien's voice was calm but laced with steel. You think coddling them will make them better? It will make them fragile. And when she leaves, because she will, they'll be worse off than before. Elena didn't linger. She didn't need to hear more. The conversation wasn't for her, and she wasn't here to change Victoria's mind. She was here for Max and Mia. Later that evening, the twins were curled up on the couch in their pajamas, pretending to watch the animated movie playing on the screen. But their eyes weren't on the characters. They were on Elena, as if gauging whether the storm that had rolled through the house had driven her away. You too tired? Elena asked softly. Mia shook her head. Not sleepy. Max muttered. Aunt Victoria always makes it feel like bedtime's a punishment. Elena smiled faintly. Well, I'm not Aunt Victoria. Bedtime is just another part of the story. They looked at her, puzzled. You start your day, you live it, and at night you rest. Then you get another chance in the morning, a whole new page. Mia leaned into her side, voice quiet. What if the next page is worse? Then you write a better one, Elena said, and I'll help you. When she guided them to their rooms, they didn't protest. They climbed into bed, still carrying traces of wariness, but Max surprised her by holding out a worn picture book. Will you read it? Her throat tightened, but she nodded. Of course. She settled between their beds, reading in a steady, warm rhythm. The story was simple, a tale of two foxes finding their way home after a storm. But it held them. By the time she closed the book, their eyes were heavy, breaths evening out. Damien stood in the doorway, silent. She hadn't heard him come up. There was no expression on his face that she could easily name, but his eyes stayed on her for a long moment before he turned and walked away. When Elena stepped into the hallway, she found him leaning against the wall. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Wanted to, she replied. His gaze searched hers, as though looking for something he wasn't sure he'd find. You know my sister thinks you'll leave, Elena said, her voice steady, but I'm not here to win her approval. Damien's lips pressed into a thin line. She's seen too many people walk away from them. From me. Then maybe it's time someone else. For a moment, they stood there in the dimly lit hallway, the air thick with unspoken things. Then Damien gave a small nod, not of agreement exactly, but of acknowledgement. Elena went to her room, closing the door softly behind her. The house was quiet now, but she could still feel the undercurrent, Victoria's warning, Damien's uncertainty, the twins' lingering fears. She didn't know if she could change all of that, but she knew she wasn't leaving. Not tonight, not tomorrow. And no matter what Victoria believed, she intended to prove it. The date was quieter than usual that night. The rain from earlier had left the air cool and damp, the scent of wet earth drifting in through the slightly open windows. Damien had been pacing in his study, half reading a report that refused to hold his attention. Something, he couldn't say what, pulled him toward the back of the house. He stepped out onto the terrace, his shoes silent against the stone. The garden stretched before him, a silvered landscape under the moonlight. At first, he thought it was empty. Then he saw her, Elena, standing near the rose arch, her phone pressed to her ear, voice low. He should have turned back. But something in her tone stopped him. Not the words, but the weight in them. No, Jamie, listen to me, she said softly, urgency threading through every syllable. You can't just walk out in the middle of the night. I know it feels like no one cares, but I do. I always will. She paused, listening, and Damien caught the faint hitch in her breathing. You're not a screw-up, she continued. You're angry, and you have every right to be. We lost them too soon, and we didn't get a say in any of it. But breaking rules won't bring them back. Damien's chest tightened. She wasn't talking about the twins. She wasn't even talking about anyone in his world. This was hers, something she'd never shared. "I am not giving up on you," Elena said, her voice firm now, almost fierce. "You hear me? You can hate me all you want, but I'm still your sister. I'm still the one who's going to fight for you, even when you don't make it easy." A muffled response came through the phone, and she closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "Okay," she murmured. "Stay put. I'll figure it out, but please, just promise me you'll stay safe tonight." When she ended the call, she didn't move right away. She stayed in the same spot, one hand resting on the cool iron of the archway, her shoulders tense. "You're good at fighting for people," Damien said quietly from the terrace. She turned sharply, startled. The moonlight caught the edges of her face, highlighting the rawness she hadn't hidden fast enough. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," he said, "to know you weren't talking to a friend." Her jaw tightened. "It's my brother," she said finally. "Jamie. He's 16. He hasn't been doing well since our parents died." Damien took a few steps closer, the grass damp underfoot. "And you've been raising him." "As much as anyone can raise someone who doesn't want to be," she said with a small, humorless laugh. "I moved here to work and send money back for him. My aunt's supposed to look after him, but she doesn't understand him. Not the way I do." Damien could hear the quiet conviction in her voice, the kind that came from someone who had learned responsibility too young. "You've been carrying this alone." She shrugged, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond him. "You'd understand. Grief has a way of twisting people, makes them do things they wouldn't. For Jamie, it's acting out. For me, it's pretending I'm fine so no one worries." Something in him shifted at those words. He'd spent years perfecting that same act, smooth sighs for the boardroom, steady hands for the twins, all while something sharp and unhealed sat beneath his ribbon. "You sound like you've lived in my head," he said quietly. Her lips curved faintly, but there was no real smile in it. Maybe grief speaks the same language, no matter where you're from. For a long moment they stood there, the garden wrapped around them in silence. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns over her face. Damien realized that, for the first time since she'd walked into his house, he wasn't thinking about her as just the woman who had managed to keep his children from pushing her away. He was seeing her as someone who carried her own storms, who knew exactly how heavy they could be. Before he could say more, the sound of small footsteps pattered across the terrace. "Is Elena?" Mia's voice was sleepy, her hair mussed. She was holding an empty glass. "I need water." Elena crouched to her level, brushing a stray curl from her face. "You should be in bed, sweetheart." "He was, but then I got thirsty," Mia said, yawning. She glanced up at Damien, then back at Elena. "Did you know the moon's really bright tonight?" Elena smiled softly. "I noticed." She took Mia's hand, leading her back toward the kitchen, the moment between her and Damien left hanging in the cool night air. But Damien knew it wasn't gone. Some things stayed, even in silence. The kitchen lights glowed warm against the darkness as Elena guided Mia inside. She reached for the water filter, filling the glass, while Mia leaned sleepily against the counter. Damien followed them in, but stayed back, leaning against the doorway. He watched as Elena crouched again, handing the glass over, and waiting until Mia had taken a sip before speaking. "Better?" she asked gently. Mia nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Can you tuck me in again?" Elena glanced briefly toward Damien, then back at Mia. "Of course." They headed upstairs together, Mia's small hand in Elena's. Damien trailed a few steps behind, listening as his daughter chattered softly about a dream she'd had. In her room, the soft pink nightlight glowed, casting a delicate halo around the bed. Elena pulled the blanket up to Mia's chin, smoothing it with care. "Good night, my brave girl," she whispered. Mia's eyelids drooped almost instantly. Within moments, her breathing steadied, deep and even. Elena stayed a moment longer, brushing a hand lightly over the blanket, as if to anchor the piece in place. When they stepped out into the hallway, Damien closed the door quietly behind them. "She's never asked a nanny to tuck her in twice in one night," he said, his voice low. "That's not because of me," Elena replied, shaking her head. It's because she's learning she doesn't have to hide her needs. They walked toward the stairs, but Damien paused halfway down, turning to face her. Earlier, when you were talking to your brother, you said something about fighting for him even when he hates you for it. Elena's gaze met his, steady but tired. I meant it. Love isn't always neat. Sometimes it's just refusing to walk away, no matter how hard it gets. Sounds familiar, Damien murmured. His mind flashed to nights sitting alone in his study, trying to figure out how to keep his own children from slipping through his fingers after their mother died. She tilted her head slightly. Maybe that's why you understand. The quiet between them was different now. Liz guarded, more knowing. The air carried a weight, but not a suffocating one. It was the weight of two people who had seen their share of storms and still chose to stand. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Damien's phone buzzed on the console table. He picked it up, scanning the message, then set it down again with a faint frown. Something wrong? Elena asked. Just business, he said, though his tone suggested it was more complicated. There's a board meeting next week I can't miss. It means I'll be out of the house more than usual. I sighed, she said easily. We'll manage here. He hesitated. You always say we when you talk about the kids, not I. Her lips curved slightly. That's because raising children isn't a solo act. Even if you're the only adult in the room, it's still we. Damien didn't reply right away, but something in his expression softened. You make it sound like you've been doing this a long time. I have, she said simply, just not always for my own. They moved into the living room, where the dim light from the fireplace flickered across the walls. Elena glanced toward the tall windows, where the moonlight still painted silver patterns on the garden. She'd call Jamie back tomorrow, she murmured, almost to herself. Make sure he's okay. You're welcome to use my study, Damien said. It's quieter there. She looked at him then, truly looked, as if weighing the offer for what it was. A small gesture of trust. Thank you, she said softly. They stood there a moment longer, the flicker of the fire playing across their faces. Neither spoke, but neither moved away. The sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the corner seemed louder in the stillness. Finally, Elena drew in a breath. Good night, Damien. Good night, Kalina. She turned and walked toward the hallway, her steps quiet on the polished floor. Damien watched her go, the soft sway of her hair catching the light, and felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. When the house was still again, he moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit garden. He could still picture her standing there earlier, phone in hand, carrying the weight of someone else's pain while holding herself together. It occurred to him that for the first time in years, he wasn't just thinking about his children's well-being. He was thinking about hers. And that, he realized, was dangerous territory. As he turned away from the glass, there was no denying that some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. The ride home from the gala was unusually quiet. Max leaned against the car window, his eyes drooping from exhaustion. Mia curled up beside him, clutching the small plush bear she had been given as a party favor. The hideous hearing of the hires on the road filled the silence. Damien sat across from them in the back of the limousine, his gaze flicking between his children and Elena. She sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap, her expression calm but distant, as though replaying the night in her mind. Halfway home, Damien finally spoke. You could have been hurt tonight. His voice was low, almost reluctant. She turned her head toward him. I didn't even think about it. She was falling. I just reacted. That's not the point, he said, his jaw tightening briefly before softening again. The point is, you were there. And if you hadn't been... He stopped himself. The rest of the sentence hung unspoken between them, a thought too sharp to voice. Mia stirred then, lifting her head sleepily. I wasn't scared, she murmured, because Elena was there. The words landed with quiet force. Damien glanced at his daughter, then at Elena, who only smiled faintly and brushed a strand of hair from Mia's forehead. By the time they reached the estate, both twins were nearly asleep. Elena helped them inside, guiding them gently up the grand staircase. Damien followed, his hands in his pockets, his mind turning over the events of the evening like a stone in his palm. In Mia's room, Elena tucked her in first, smoothing the blanket and placing the plush bear beside her. Max received the same careful attention in his own room. Neither child stirred again once their heads touched the pillows. When Elena stepped back into the hallway, Damien was waiting. "Walk with me," he said. They descended the stairs together, the echo of their footsteps blending with the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. In the study, Damien closed the door behind them. "I've been thinking about something," he began. "You've been here longer than anyone else. Do you know why that is?" Elena tilted her head slightly. "I imagine it's because I haven't run screaming yet." He didn't smile. "It's because you're the only one who's ever seen them for who they are. Not as trouble to be managed, but as people to be understood." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak right away. The sincerity in his voice was unguarded, almost vulnerable. "I see them because I've been them," she said finally. "Children act out when they feel unseen. It's not mischief, it's survival." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "And you've shown me something I didn't expect to see again in this house. Hope." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them tightened with something unspoken, something that hummed quietly under the surface. Then, from the hallway above, Max's voice rang out. "Dad? Elena?" The sound broke whatever spell had formed. Elena's eyes flickered toward the ceiling, her posture shifting back to its usual composure. "I'll check on him." She slipped past Damien and out into the hallway, her footsteps light but quick. Damien stood alone in the study, staring at the closed door, feeling as though something had shifted in a way that could never be reversed. Upstairs, Elena found Max sitting up in bed, rubbing his eyes. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled. She sat beside him, smoothing the blanket over his legs. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He shook his head and leaned into her side. She stayed there until his breathing slowed again, her own thoughts far from the dream he wouldn't share. Somewhere down the hall, Damien listened from the shadows, hearing only the gentle cadence of her voice and wondering, perhaps for the first time in years, if this wasn't just about keeping a nanny at all. The ride home from the gala was wrapped in the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, like the lingering echo of something unspoken. The twins sat together on the rear seat of the limousine, Max leaning his head against the window, watching the city lights blur past, while Mia clutched the little plush bear from the party, her small fingers tracing the stitching over and over. Elena sat across from them, her posture relaxed but her eyes thoughtful. Damien's gaze shifted between her and his children. Every few minutes, he opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally, he said, "You could have been hurt tonight." Elena turned to meet his eyes, her expression steady. "I didn't think about that. I only thought about Mia." "That's not the point," Damien said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "The point is, you were there. If you hadn't been—" He stopped himself. The rest of the thought didn't need words. Mia stirred, lifting her head just enough to mumble, "I wasn't scared, because Elena caught me." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, pressed something deep in Damien's chest. He looked at Elena, but she didn't respond, just reached over to adjust Mia's seatbelt and brushed a stray hair from her forehead. By the time they reached the estate, Max was already asleep. Elena gently woke him, guiding him inside, her voice soft enough not to rouse Mia too much. Damien followed, watching her hands as they steadied his son's steps up the staircase. She tucked Mia in first, smoothing the blanket over her small frame, then went to Max's room to do the same. Neither child protested. They both seemed, for the first time in weeks, ready to rest without a fight. When Elena stepped out into the hall, Damien was leaning against the wall. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved down the staircase together, the faint creak of the steps filling the silence. In the study, Damien closed the door behind them. "I've been thinking," he began, standing by the desk while she stayed near the doorway. "You've lasted here longer than anyone else." Her mouth curved slightly. "Maybe I just have a higher tolerance for chaos." His tone didn't change. "No, it's because you're the only one who's ever seen them for who they are. Not trouble to be managed, but people to be understood." Elena's hands tightened around the notebook she carried. I see them because I've been them. Children who act out aren't trying to destroy anything. They're trying to make themselves heard. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet from her. And you've shown me something I wasn't sure I'd see in this house again. Hope. Something shifted in her gaze then, softening, as though she saw the cracks beneath his usual steel. They stood there, the air between them charged with an unspoken understanding neither could name. A voice from upstairs broke it. Dad? Elena? Max called, his voice edged with the tail end of a dream. Elena was the first to move. I'll check on him, she said, stepping around Damien and heading toward the stairs. In Max's room, she found him sitting up, rubbing his eyes. Bad dream? She asked gently. He nodded, leaning against her when she sat on the edge of the bed. She stayed until his breathing steadied again, brushing his hair back with a tenderness that felt like second nature. From the hallway, Damien stood, unseen, listening to the low, calming rhythm of her voice. Something in him settled that hadn't been at rest in years, and he knew, without saying it aloud, that tonight had changed more than one thing in this house. The garden had changed in the last 6 months, almost as much as the people who walked through it. Where once the roses had been untrimmed and the grass uneven, now every bloom stood proud, the paths carefully tended. A place that had once felt like a backdrop now felt lived in. Loved? It was a Saturday afternoon, warm enough that the sunlight stretched across the lawn like a golden blanket. Max and Mia ran ahead of Damien and Elena, their laughter drifting back like music. Each carried something in their hands, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Damien carried a small wicker basket, his stride unhurried. Elena walked beside him, her hair catching the light in a way he'd caught himself noticing more often than he wanted to admit. When they reached the far corner of the garden, near the willow tree, Max stopped and turned toward them, excitement dancing in his eyes. Here, he said, pointing to a spot they had cleared earlier in the week. We finished it. Elena tilted her head, curiosity written across her face. Finished what? Mia set her bundle down carefully, revealing a small, polished bench. The wood gleamed, freshly treated, and across the back was a brass plaque. The sunlight caught the engraving as Elena leaned closer to read. Her breath caught. For mine, who taught us love? For Elena, who taught us trust? She blinked quickly, her throat tightening. You two, you did this? Max nodded proudly. We saved our allowance. Dad helped a little, but it was our idea. Mia grinned, a gap showing where her front tooth had been lost last week. It's so we can sit here and remember Mom, and so we can always remember you're not going anywhere. Elena looked from one child to the other, her heart aching in the most unexpected way. She crouched down to their level, her voice barely above a whisper. You have no idea what this means to me. Damien stood a step back, his hands in his pockets, watching the way Elena pulled the twins into her arms. He'd seen a lot in his life, deals made and broken, fortunes built and lost, but few things had ever looked as unshakable as the bond in front of him. After the bench was placed in its spot, they all sat together under the willow. The twins chattered about school, about the garden's new vegetable patch, about the butterfly Mia swore was her personal friend. Elena listened, asking questions that showed she remembered every small detail they'd told her before. It was in moments like this, Damien realized just how far they'd come. 6 months ago, the twins had been bundles of restless energy, daring the world to try and contain them. Now, their mischief hadn't vanished. It never would, but it had softened into curiosity and joy rather than defense. The shift hadn't been easy. There had been long days, setbacks, and more than a few tears, but there had also been mornings when Max voluntarily set the table, or Mia read a story aloud without being asked. Little victories that had added up to something bigger than any of them had imagined. After a while, Mia looked up at Damien. Can we have the picnic now? He smiled faintly. Yes, but I think Elena should open the basket. Elena gave him a questioning look, but when she lifted the lid, her eyes widened. Inside, wrapped neatly in linen, was an arrangement of her favorite foods: fresh baguette, cheeses, strawberries, and the lemon tarts she'd once mentioned in passing that reminded her of her childhood. "You remembered," she said softly. "Remember a lot of things," Damien replied, his tone even but his gaze warm. They set the picnic blanket under the willow's shade, the twins eagerly unpacking the food. They talked and laughed as they ate, and for once, Damien didn't check his phone or glance toward the house. He was here, fully present, and it felt right. When the food was nearly gone, Damien cleared his throat. "Something I want to tell you." The twins looked up instantly. Elena paused, her hands resting on her lap. "I've started a scholarship fund," Damien continued. "In your name, Elena, for children in foster care or kids who've lost their parents." Her eyes went wide. "You, what?" "You've given my children something money can't buy," he said. "It seemed fitting to make sure other kids have a chance at the kind of care and guidance you've given them." For a moment, she didn't speak. She just looked at him, then down at the grass, then back again, as though weighing whether she could even find the right words. "It's more than I ever expected," she managed finally, her voice uneven. "Thank you." Max leaned against her arm, his small voice breaking the moment. "Does this mean you can never leave?" Elena smiled faintly, but something in her chest tightened. She glanced at Damien, as if to see if the question was meant for her alone. Damien said, "Is something I think we should talk about." The late afternoon light was turning golden, the kind that seemed to wrap everything in a quiet glow. The picnic blanket lay between them, scattered with crumbs and the last of the strawberries. Elena sat with her legs tucked to the side, brushing Mia's hair out of her face, while Max leaned back against Damien's arm. It was one of those rare, effortless moments that made it hard to imagine a time when their lives hadn't been intertwined. Damien shifted slightly, his eyes fixed on Elena. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he began. She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "When you came here, I thought you'd be gone in a week, maybe less. Not because I doubted your ability, but because, well, no one else lasted." Alicia's quirked. "I remember you saying something like that during the interview." He nodded. "And yet, here we are. 6 months later. My kids trust you. They look for you before they look for me half the time. And he stopped, imagining this house without you in it." Elena blinked, caught off guard by the rawness in his voice. "Damien?" He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to keep working here. I'm asking you to stay as part of our family." For a long heartbeat she didn't move. The only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the soft rustle of the willow leaves. Then Mia spoke, her voice small but clear. "Does that mean you'd be like our forever person?" Elena's eyes shimmered. She reached out, pulling Mia close. "If that's what you want, then yes. I'd like that." Max straightened. "Me too." Damien's shoulders eased, the tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying finally loosening. "So, is that a yes?" Elena laughed softly, brushing at the corner of her eyes. "It's a yes." The twins cheered, and in the flurry of movement, Mia wrapped her arms around Elena's neck while Max hugged her from the side. Damien watched the three of them, the image etching itself into his memory. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, they stayed under the willow, talking about everything and nothing. Plans for the summer, ideas for the memory wall in the playroom, dreams that didn't feel so far away anymore. It wasn't a grand, cinematic ending. It was something quieter, more certain, the kind of ending that was also a beginning. By the time they walked back to the house, the air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. Damien held the door open for them, and as Elena passed, their eyes met. No more unspoken questions, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was home, and for the first time in a long time, so were they.